Hello there. My name is Max Smolacks, editor at AI Business, and in this Experts in AI interview, we are going to talk about responsible and ethical AI. And to discuss this topic, I'm pleased to welcome Rick Britt, who's Vice President of AI at CallMiner, and Micaela Kaplan, a data scientist and head of responsible AI at CallMiner. Hello, Rick and Micaela. Lovely to have you with us.
Max, thank you. Thanks for
Hey.
having us.
Yes, and before we start, Rick, could you give us a short introduction to CallMiner? What is it that you guys do with AI?
Absolutely. Yeah, we are a conversation analytics company, which means when customers interact with their brand, through email or chat or voice, and they have an interaction, we take that interaction and we turn it into data. And then that data becomes interrogatable and analyzable by the organization and by machine learning models. And so our business is taking those communications and turning them into something relevant, basically providing a voice of a customer and the voice of the agent to an organization who has a lot of interactions and they can't read them. And so that's what we do. As a software company, we have a very well-tested piece of software with a lot of clients that do exactly that.
All right, and this is obviously a hot industry topic, but what is the state of ethical AI in the industry today? Like what have you seen?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're really passionate about this, and as we began to look around, not only our industry but the software industry, I'm going to expand out to my peer group that's well beyond just conversation analytics. But as we began to look at the software company, Max, not many people were focused on the responsibility and ethical nature of what they're doing from an AI perspective, certainly from a security perspective or InfoSec or any number of compliance perspectives, where the government cares. It feels like there's a lot of focus, but in this area where the scientists, the research scientists like Micaela and I are involved, there's not as much necessity to really have a focus on how responsible and ethical the models you're building are. And really that boils down, and Micaela will cover a lot more about it as sort of our leader. She's done a lot more research than I have on this, but this really boils down into what is the data we're feeding into these models and how do we really be sure that the stuff we're doing is responsible? And then what is the model doing with it? And how is it returning a result that a human will use for responsible nature? So obviously we can't control a bad actor, someone who chooses to do something terrible with a piece of software. You buy Microsoft Word, you can write a manifesto on it and try to take over the world, or you could actually write the most beautiful novel ever written. I can't control what someone types on a keyboard, but what we can do is stop the biases entering as much as we can, and then in some cases leave them in. And we'll talk a bit about that and point them out to the human being on the other end who's using them. Sometimes we need to see bias. Sometimes we don't hide it because we need to know it's out there. Other times we need to just limit it and say we should not allow a model to be so biased that it's kicking out a result. So the answer is it's really very close to zero. Micaela and I know a lot of companies who do it, but when you look at that lot of companies compared to the world of companies, and we've talked to quite a few, very few people, that number is so close to zero, you've got to get really close, Max, to make sure it's actually a number at all. People are not really focused on this yet. We know they will be. We know this is coming. We know that the EU is regulating it, that the UK is looking to move to regulation on it. The US will follow. Asia will follow. This is going to happen, but we need to be on the forefront. We need to be guiding that in our position. So that's where we are. I think the answer is not where we hope it'll be, but we're hoping that by talking about it and by being open and sharing what we're doing, maybe we can drive a little more participation.
Yes, and it probably testifies to the maturity of the industry that, it's just like people are no longer chasing innovation for innovation's sake, like they really care about what impact they actually have on the people on the ground. So I guess my next question is for Micaela. Why is this important? Why should we, as the end users, care about ethical and responsible AI?
Yeah, I think it's a really human issue, and I think it's a really, person to person situation. I think, if you look at what's happening in the world and all the social justice that's happening in the world, be it in this country, be it in another country, I think we're really at a point where the status quo isn't flying anymore. And I think that's great in a lot of ways. But I also think all of these models that we train, the math isn't inherently biased. It's not like math is biased as math. It's just math. But when you feed it data that comes from a world that is inherently biased and inherently unfair, you're going to teach models to become inherently biased and inherently unfair because the models don't have any sort of, critical thinking skills, or it's just math. And it's become, in the last couple of years, it's become a really huge deal in academia, which I am very lucky to get to keep a real good pulse on in my job as a researcher. Some of the big players, your Googles and your Microsofts of the world, have really gotten to start touching it. But in working on a research team at a company like CallMiner, we make a product that touches people's lives, right? Like it's interacting with the way that people do their jobs every single day. And in some cases, it's dictating, how people are performing and the way performance reviews are going, and, who gets promoted and who doesn't get promoted, and all these kinds of things. And I think it's really important as a researcher who's building tools for this product that I and my team can really make sure that we're not embedding any biases into our data, that we know that what we're doing is going to have a fair and ethical impact on the people whose lives it's touching, and that we keep track of all of the decisions that we're making and all of the conversations that we're having, so that we can give it to our dev team or to our end users and say, hey, here's what we took into consideration. Here's where we think you might see these biases in your data. We live in a biased world. These things are going to pop up. If you have racist or sexist or, any of your other ist kinds of people calling into your call center, it's going to show up in your data. And we don't want to erase that, because it's part of what your company is dealing with every single day. But it is important that you're aware that these things are happening so that you can better service your employees.
It's very interesting. And before we had this technology, we didn't really think about sort of like these decisions at scale and how they're shaped. And now it's almost like AI is helping us to find out more about how humans operate. But from a business point of view, like this is probably a question for Rick. Like, why did you're essentially an SME company, software as a service, why did you decide to get involved with this at such an early stage, when you said yourself, like it's kind of like like single digits, if that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love, we humans want singular stories, right? We would love to have a moment, inflection point. We love inflection points. I think we have a few that we could point to, and I'll share one. But I think it's a lot of different elements. Actually, we stood back and said, "Wait a minute, we're on to something here." And it was actually we had a person who started this in our organization, who's no longer with us. She actually went to do ethics in AI specifically for an HR software company, which is it's like a badge of honor to do that, right? Are you hiring ethically? Are you reviewing ethically? It's just amazing. But Jamie started us on this path, and I think there was a couple of moments that really became seminal for us. We were putting some new technology into our product, and that technology, by its very nature of what it was doing, it's an embedding type product, and it began to point out blatant racism, and that was racism that an agent was having to endure from a customer of a company. And it wasn't a singular client that had this problem. This is humans, Americans, were calling into international call centers and were overtly racist towards those individuals. And we saw this thing, and we began to really debate as a research organization, what do we do about it? What's our responsibility to this data we don't control? All we do is take an interaction, bring it in, turn it into data, and then use some products to try to make sense of it. And when it made sense of it, it did a wonderful job. It also made sense of it. And we began to say, we have a responsibility to tell the organizations, because back in the day, when a racist I used to joke, I used to work at Capital One. And when I worked at Capital One, we used to joke that even serial killers have credit cards, right? Even crazy people that are way off the chain and desperately need help, or should be cordoned from society, have these vehicles to buy things, right? And they would call us. And so we would just kind of one-off it. And we would say, oh, yeah, crazy person, right? Terrible stuff we used to say. And so we began to look in aggregate at this data, Max, and we found that it's not just a one-off. It's a trend. It's a thing. And either humans, Americans, need help, people in the world need help, or we need to help that organization, maybe help that agent from getting off the phone. I've worked with organizations in the past that would never allow an agent to hang up. And that makes sense, right? You don't want an agent hanging up on a customer. That would be a terrible thing, which means they had to sit there and take racist rants for as long as the customer wanted to unload on them. They could not hang up the call. And so beginning to think about the strategies of organizations and informing them with this data was a really seminal moment for us when we found this model that was pointing out racism. Extrapolate that to the UK, where vulnerability is a big part of a business's need in the UK. So, in those of you that aren't aware, if you're in the United Kingdom, a company has a responsibility to look for vulnerable nature of its customers, not regarding its product, of its customers. And I'll tell you what that, give an example in a second, and then do something about it. This is wildly different than what we experience in the United States. We have lots of clients in the UK. They use our software almost explicitly for this purpose, to find vulnerabilities, because asking a human to do that. Now, the idea is, if you're, let's say, a company and a customer has changed their address 3 times or 4 times recently, that displays a level of vulnerability. That may mean hopelessness. That may mean abuse. That may mean some sort of a vulnerability. And the client has the responsibility to ask the questions. Is everything okay? And they stop the business call. They go into a different process. And if they don't feel it's okay, they provide resources or even turn that particular individual over to a government agency that can help them. These 2 moments really began to put together as an organization. We have a desire and need to be responsible. So we got involved very quickly. We looked around the industry and said, who else is doing this? Who else is? And it's Google and Amazon. It's the gold-plated players. It's Microsoft. It's IBM. These are the people who have the money to do ethics, right? I got the cash to do ethics. We're not a big company. We're 330 people. We have just under 400 clients. We're not massive. We're not Microsoft. But we knew that we wanted to enter into their space of ethical AI and responsible AI very early, because we knew that we were informing, to Micaela's point, business strategy, and we knew that we had a responsibility to show what's truly going on. So that's why we got involved very, very early in our life cycles, because we wanted to do the right thing, but also it's a great decision business-wise and a great decision as members of society to think about responsibility and what your product, your software, your machines do.
Okay, but that obviously puts a lot of pressure on your data scientists, right? So yeah, it's so Micaela, like, what makes you so passionate about this that you're actually happy to take this on, like, consider this, and because I imagine, like, the core part of your work is difficult enough. So yeah, what motivates you? Why are you kind of giving your secrets away? Why are you taking this out to the industry?
Yeah, so I think it is really hard, and it's definitely a little bit of an added workload, but we have found that when you can sort of integrate this conversation into your workflow to begin with, responsible AI isn't just like a box you can check off. You can't just be like, oh, did that. Okay, moving on with my project now. It's really got to be something that you start early and you keep talking about often, as you sort of make it just another part of your process. It doesn't feel like it's like sort of bearing that weight. And we found that having a conversation as a team and sort of bringing in diverse perspectives and diverse lived experiences and diverse backgrounds really helps us to identify places that there might be vulnerabilities there, or that the people might be able to be harmed or privileged or benefited by these systems. And I wouldn't call them secrets particularly. All of the research is out there. I've been very lucky to get to spend some time really digging through it and reading all of it and compiling it for myself and my peers. But, I think, like I said before, this is a really human issue. And I think that you can't just think of it as, another box to check off or another thing that you just have to do. I think it's the right thing to do. It's the responsible thing to do. Even we lump into responsible AI things like explainable AI. Can you explain why your model is making the decision that it's making, which helps you to be responsible, and it helps you to make sure that people are using your tools as they are intended to be used. But that's just part of good data science. Good data science is understanding how your models work. It's understanding the data that you put into your models. It's understanding what the output of your model looks like. And I think in being a product-facing team, the extrapolation of, well, how are people going to use it and how is it going to touch people's lives is a very natural progression point here. And I think this is one of those communities that gets stronger the more people that get involved. The whole thing around responsible AI and ethics, and if you want to go into social justice issues, you can, is that everyone comes from a really different background, and everyone has a very different lived experience and a really different perspective on the world and the ways that we interact with society. And you can't pretend to have responsible AI if you're only getting one perspective on anything. And I'm very lucky to work on a very diverse team where we have that diversity of perspectives, but we're also one company and we're one product and we're one sort of mindset when it comes to the way that our product touches the world. And so by encouraging other companies to, engage with this work, and by sharing the tools that I've found and the tools that I've created, we can become stronger also. Other companies have other perspectives, have other tools, have other processes. And I'm excited to learn from the community as well as people start to dig into this work and start to find what works for them. It's not a perfect process as we have it. I don't claim I'm sitting here on an experts panel, but I don't claim to be an expert on, all of responsible AI. And I think that as we can learn from each other and expand the conversation, this will just become a stronger, more impactful field.
So, would you advise other companies, like to do it now, to not wait until, like this becomes like an industry-wide issue? Would you say that it will be a benefit if they start on this journey early, even if they're a small company, even if they think, like maybe it doesn't apply to them and to the same degree that it applies to Facebook and Google?
Absolutely. I think, I'm also, part of my job is that I code, I'm a programmer. We talk about technical debt a lot, right? This is the code that you wrote 5 years ago that was like good enough for what you needed it to do, but was like kind of sloppy, and you knew that you never wanted to go back and edit it ever again because it was like a mess and you didn't really know how to code then. I refer to that person as intern Micaela. Intern Micaela didn't know what she was doing. She made a lot of mistakes. She's learned a lot, but we don't talk about her that often. And you have to, at some point, inevitably go back and fix that code and deal with that code or change decisions you made a long time ago. We call that technical debt, right? And I think, ethical debt, responsible AI debt, this is a term that we've thrown around internally. It's a term that the Montreal Ethics AI Institute has also used, is going to catch up to us, right? We all make these decisions. Every company is making decisions, even your very smallest companies are making business decisions now, are making technical decisions now that are going to impact their company for the rest of that company's life. And I think that the sooner you get into this conversation, the sooner you engage with it, the less ethical debt you'll have, and the more willing you'll have, to continue that conversation in the future. Also, I'm very young. I am solidly in that millennial category, if not maybe a zillennial. I don't know. But, for people my age, engaging with companies that are responsible has become a huge thing. A lot of people my age would rather something a little more expensive or something that has, working for a company that has slightly less good benefits or slightly less good pay because they pay attention to responsible AI or because they pay attention to, these societal issues. And so I think even from a business perspective in that way, it's just the way the world is going. And I think it's important to start engaging with that now. Why wait?
Okay, well, it's a very, very positive message. And if you would like to hear more about responsible AI, ethical AI, CallMiner will be presenting at the upcoming AI Summit in New York. That's taking place on December 8th and 9th at the Javits Center. And you can book a meeting, see their products in action. And you can certainly discuss, your own approach to ethical AI. So thank you very much, Rick, Micaela. It's been a pleasure. And good luck in your work.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.